Well, we're back with this special edition of Focus Today on Veterans Day, and delighted to have with us back for a time together Rod Gragg. He's a author of numerous books on history, and we've had him before: Declaration of Independence, Lewis and Clark, On the Trail of Discovery, and today his latest book, Lessons in Leadership from the Greatest Generation. There's a picture of it on the screen, those watching on the Dove TV. And let me encourage you to check it out at Amazon or Barnes & Noble and get a copy of it, and because there's some great things in there. Hi, Rod. How you doing, my friend?
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Nice to have you with us today. Well, of all the things you took on, there's so many stories on leadership from this great generation. How in the world did you compile this?
Well, that was really the charge, but that was also the fun part, you know, and a very inspirational thing, spending your time in the company of those folks. But for different projects over time, since really the 50th anniversary of World War II in the 90s, I have interviewed countless World War II veterans and people who've lived in that era, and it's been a great blessing to me and to spend time in the company of that generation.
Boy, they're passing quickly, and as we now see some of these stories just kind of fade away. I just had a gentleman on who served in the Battle of the Bulge and actually was part of a liberation of a concentration camp, and they just went in because it was the thing to do. It was evil against good, and where is that courage today?
Well, you know, they are passing from memory into history, and we're going to miss them, and they're going to leave a giant void in our culture. But thankfully, they have left us a great legacy of character and values and leadership, which is what I'm trying to do with this book, Lessons in Leadership from the Greatest Generation.
All right, let's talk about that, because can world leaders and modern leaders today learn from these leaders during the World War II?
Oh, absolutely. This was a generation that was remarkable for its discipline, its selflessness, its willingness to do its duty, dependability, patriotism, and there's a great deal to learn from them. And what I've tried to do in this book is to take 10 lessons in leadership that they really have personified as a people, as a generation of Americans, and explain and express those lessons in leadership in stories of people who personify those leadership traits who were members of the greatest generation.
Well, for the sake of time, Rod, go ahead and share a couple of those with us.
Well, I will. One who comes to mind is a naval commander named Dick Antrim, and I stood over his grave at Arlington National Cemetery just a few months ago, and he was a modest, unassuming guy. He was in the Navy when the war began, commanded a destroyer in the South Pacific that was sunk at the Second Battle of Java Sea, and he demonstrated a lesson in leadership then and how he managed to save his entire crew from the sinking of that ship. And then they were picked up by Japanese naval forces and were incarcerated in a prison camp in Indonesia. You know, the Japanese prison camps were about the worst place you could be. People were starved, they were tortured. If the officers complained, they could be beheaded. And this tells a story about this guy, Dick Antrim, this Navy commander in this prison camp, who saw an American naval officer who failed to bow low enough to a Japanese guard being beat to his knees and in the process of being beaten to death. And the story tells what Antrim did and how he responded, and which won him, by the way, the Congressional Medal of Honor and saved a lot of lives. But it illustrates a lesson that real leaders take care of their people. And so these are the lessons that come through there. And another story that comes to mind is a World War II veteran who's in this book, who actually was a friend of mine and who passed away just a couple of years ago. His name was Mike Fitch. He was a farm boy from South Carolina. He wound up in Charlie Sector, second wave, Omaha Beach on D-Day. That was about the bloodiest part of the bloodiest beach to be in. And the lesson in leadership that he demonstrated in that day on that beach at Omaha is, well, it reflects the very simple truth that the absence of fear is not necessarily an expression of courage. Real courage is doing what you have to do despite your fear. And that's what Mike Fitch did at Omaha Beach that day. And the lesson in leadership that's demonstrated there is that real leaders choose to be courageous.
That's the story we just heard also, where you step over the body of your comrades and you keep going forward.
That's right. And that's what he did, literally. In his words, he had to hopscotch over those troops. And then he spent the afternoon on Omaha Beach trying to knock out a German emplacement called WN-73, which had artillery and machine gun, and it was just taking a terrible toll on the Americans on the far right flank of Omaha Beach. And he and two other men, he was part of a two-man reconnaissance team, and they were joined by a third man, and they were trying to knock it out with hand grenades, which were bouncing off and not working, and then high cliffs on that end of Omaha Beach, and the German defenders were dropping hand grenades on them. So they designated one man to catch the falling German hand grenades and throw them out on the beach, while the two of them tried to knock out this installation. And they finally figured out that if they could ricochet their fire from their small arms, from their rifles, in through the porthole of this gun emplacement and ricochet it off the ceiling, then they could silence that battery, which wow. they managed to do. But it's an incredible story of wow. someone who demonstrates courage.
Do you talk about General Eisenhower?
I do. In fact, he's one of the lessons. He and Admiral Nimitz in the Pacific. Eisenhower, of course, is the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And Eisenhower really demonstrated a great deal of leadership. But what the focus is on this story about him is kind of a little-known story. He is viewed as, of course, the architect of D-Day and a superb job of the largest amphibious operation in history. And it was his conduct and leadership in World War II that eventually propelled him to be president of the United States. But what many people don't realize is that when the D-Day landings began and the paratroopers went in, Eisenhower had already written out a message to be released to the world if the invasion failed. And in it, he blamed no one and took full responsibility for the failure of D-Day. And of course, it didn't fail, but the lesson that's taught here is that real leaders always take responsibility.
Is that letter? Is that in your book where he has written that out?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
But you know, there's something to remember. I think that we call these folks the greatest generation, and I believe they were. And when you talk to them, though, if you talk to any of them long enough, then they talk about how they were raised and about their parents. And they were raised by the last generation of Americans to grow up in the 19th century. And that was a century when the American traditional values, that Judeo-Christian worldview, those biblical values were so strong that the century was known as the Christian century.
Right.
And it's no accident that this generation that we revere so much had those values that they were raised with that came from the last generation of the 19th century.
Wow. Well, I know you could probably talk a long time on that. We're just about out of time, and I want to get you back. This is fascinating. Do you think any of those leadership skills are surfacing today?
Well, you know, these are enduring values, these values based on those biblical values, on that Judeo-Christian worldview, what we call traditional American values. They last forever, and they will work for anybody who exercises them and puts them to work.
Amen.
And so that's what I hope that this book will do. It will preserve some of those lessons in leadership based on those values, and that will be a part of the legacy that this generation, this greatest generation, has left for us.
I got about a minute left. Tell us about Elaine Wright, if you can.
Sure. Elaine Wright didn't wear a uniform. She wasn't in the military. She was a volunteer in the USO, which was a nonprofit group that provided a lot of services for troops. And the most popular thing was the USO canteen. And she was a worker in the USO canteen in a little town in Nebraska that served, over the course of the war, millions of troops. And the story is told about her and how she worked so hard every day in that canteen, and then one day failed to show up because she had learned that her son had been lost in combat. But the next day, there she was serving those troops. And she said, I can't help my son now, but I can help someone else's son. And the lesson in leadership is that real leaders persevere.
Wow, fascinating. Rod, thank you. The name of the book is, or the title of the book is entitled Lessons in Leadership from the Greatest Generation. There's a picture of it on the screen. Let me encourage you to check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon. Rod, thanks for your work, my friend. God bless you. Keep up the good work, and we'll get you back soon.
Thank you. Blessing to be with you.
All right, God bless you. All right, again, take time today to thank a veteran. If you see one out there, if you know one, and if you are one, we want to say thank you for your service. God bless you. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.